My Van and Melanine, and well met indeed. I'm Arachir Galadirthan and joined by Jess yet again for another discussion of Rings of Power. We're on episode 4 now. And we're going to talk about our questions in the show, Jess's questions, and some other bits and bobs. So before we dive into anything at all, let me first of all just say that I've amended my Discord channel, the Order of the Swan, to have a forum dedicated to Rings of Power. So if you're on the Discord, or if you want to talk about them more than the YouTube comments section allows, then jump on the Discord down below. The forum's at the top, and you can start talking about it with other people. And crucially, try and post your questions there if you're able to, because it's easier for us to find them. Also, the videos are going to take a little bit of a shift, something that a lot of people have requested. We're going to start by talking about any corrections from the previous videos. So lots of you obviously comment when we talk about this show, and many of you comment on the things that I say. And sometimes, because I'm saying it all from the top of my head, there are bits and bobs that are maybe generally accurate but could be doing with being refined or just outright wrong. And we're going to just cover corrections first. Then Jess will give her questions. Then she's going to go over your questions, the key ones that we found in the comments that we want to talk about. And then lastly, we're going to add on a little bit of a speculation section at the end of the video. We're going to do it at the end of the video so that, because it will be spoiler based, because of course it will just say things that happen in the book, so it might spoil bits and bobs about the show. So there'll be a spoilery speculation section at the end that you can skip if you don't want to have any spoilers. And I think that covers all of the changes to the way the videos are going to go. Anything to add, Jess?
No, I think you have covered pretty much everything.
Perfect. So for this week, diving straight in with corrections first of all, let's just very, very, very briefly say that in episode number 1, I mentioned that Galadriel is not that magical. She's mystical and she's powerful, but she's not magical. But as many people then decided to point out quite correctly, she is magical. But magic in Middle-earth is so hard to quantify, and it's not like Harry Potter, for example, where you cast a spell. It's so more esoteric and difficult to discuss.
That's a big word.
That it's difficult to pin down. But Galadriel is an incredibly powerful elf, and part of that is the mystical, magical background that she has. But she isn't going to stand up and cast a spell or anything. It manifests itself in really different ways, and it's very difficult to describe accurately, to my understanding. And the comments correcting me would support that theory, because each one of them described it in a different way. So Galadriel is really powerful, is the takeaway, and maybe I played down how powerful she is, and a part of that is her magics. But it's not like Gandalf or Saruman, where you're going to see a spell or he's got these powerful magical fireworks or anything like the film has. So that's the only real correction from the past 2 that I wanted to touch upon.
That might be, because they're not showing her as magical, are they, at the moment? So it could be so that we don't get confused between Galadriel and the person that's landed in the meteor, because that person is magical because of the way that when they got all like, and then the fire went and then blew out and then all the trees swayed. So maybe they're not showing it then, but in the lore, would she have been magical now? Would her magic be presenting itself, or is it because she's younger? Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, so a large part of Galadriel's power does come from the ring that she will get at the end of this show, which I don't think is a spoiler, because obviously the show's literally called Rings of Power. But so her magics are bolstered by the ring, but that's not the foundation of her power. She is just a really powerful elf. But yeah, her magic would be different from the meteor guy, who we still don't know who that is. All right, so that's the only real correction from the past few. There were some minor bits and bobs, but nothing. They were more discussion points rather than outright corrections, whereas I do feel like I didn't explain well enough that Galadriel is actually super powerful and she does have inherent magic ability. So, with that aside, let's then dive into this episode with Jess's questions.
Okay, so my first one was about the regent, the Queen Regent. I've forgotten her name. But is she magical? Does she have powers? Or, because she wakes up and she's having a dream, does she have foresight or
no? So she doesn't have any powers at all. Her name is Tar Miriel, and no, she has no powers. She's just a normal human, and what she's getting is just dreams or visions of what is to come, and that is almost certainly, as we've seen in the episode, because she's just dreaming about what she saw in the Palantir.
Does her does her father have any magical?
No, so Tar Palantir, incidentally, which is his name, he doesn't have any magical powers either. He's just wise, is the way that Tolkien kind of writes it, in that he has the foresight to see that the path Numenor is on is one that will lead to their destruction, and he tries to claw them back, and that's why he's called Tar Palantir, which literally means far-sighted. That's what Palantir means. But the island does not agree with him, as we see, as the show will then see. And Miriel already spoke of briefly in the episode where she mentioned about there were riots when he tried to change it back. And it's similar. So Tar Miriel, her father, doesn't have magic powers either. He just has the foresight to see that what they're doing is bad.
My next question is about Isildur's mother. Is there anything special about her? Because they mention it as a insult to Isildur when they fall out, but I don't remember actually hearing anything about her or anyone mentioning her prior to that point.
Yeah, so in the show, he specifically mentions that she's dead, which I think you may not have picked up on as you didn't just mention it there.
Yeah.
But in the lore, Isildur's mother is never, ever mentioned. Elendil is said to have 2 sons, and Tolkien never told us who they were with, who she is, what her name is, anything about her. That is a total blank spot in the story, and they can do whatever they want with it. And they've opted to have her die. So she's not going to be in the show either, by the sounds of it. But no, we know nothing about Isildur's mother. It's a total blank spot.
Maybe they say it in an insult way in terms of you'd be better off if you were like her. So as in, like her being dead, rather than...
Well, he said something about pining after his dead mother.
Oh, because when him looking west.
Yeah, something like that.
Okay. My next question was about Orod Ruin. The healer woman that I've forgotten her name, she...
Give it a go.
What?
Give it a go. You know what I mean. Imagine you're speaking Italian, if it helps.
Well, I can't do that. I can't roll my R's very well.
You've got to try at least.
Can't.
All you have to do is flick the tongue.
Yeah, but that's... You like languages.
All right. Anyway, carry on then.
No, I'm just going to sound silly. They mention Orod Ruin. I'm not going to do it. I'm just not going to do it. In the fact that they have to give up the lands from here until that up to that point, aren't they? Is that when they mentioned that's yeah. What is that? And we haven't heard it mentioned before.
Yeah, so Orod Ruin is the Sindarin name for Mount Doom, which is silly. And I've said this to Jess, and I'm going to say it now anyway, but the humans that live in Mordor who have never met the Sindar would not call their mountain in Elvish. They'd give it its own name. But obviously they've slipped it in to give all of us lore nerds a little nod. But Orod Ruin is Mount Doom. And in the show she mentioned that means that everyone from here to Orod Ruin is in the tower. And they just slipped it in so that you'd know again. If you know, you know. And if you don't know, you don't know. They'll tell you later. But if you do know, then it's like, oh yeah, we're definitely in Mordor then because that's Mount Doom. But Orod Ruin is Sindarin, and it literally means burning mountain or fiery mountain. Orod means mountain, and Ruin means fiery or great fire or burning. There aren't very many Sindarin words, so most of them have like 3 or 4 meanings. So yeah, that's Orod Ruin. It's just Mount Doom.
So that means the area that they're in is the sea bit.
Yeah, they're in Mordor. Yeah.
So they're all in Mordor, isn't that right now?
No, Arondir and all those humans. That storyline is in Mordor.
Yeah, so they're going to have to travel over the mountains to get away, or through the mountains to get away.
Yeah, they'll have to either go out of what will become the Black Gate, or they'd have to go all the way east and round. Because the tunnel with Shelob in probably hasn't been found yet, or may not even exist yet. I don't know if Shelob creates that tunnel. I don't really know about the tunnel that much because it's such a minor point. But yeah, they're trapped basically. That's why they can't flee.
Okay. My next question was about Palantirs.
Palantiri,
plural. How do they work? Because obviously in the show we see it showing a vision of the future, a specific vision to everyone that does it, and it places you at the point that the Palantir, obviously, or the Valar, whoever someone wants you to see it from that perspective. But in the Lord of the Rings films, which granted I know are the films, but we see that almost being used by Saruman as like a way to see things. So what, almost like the present, or to speak with Sauron. But that's not how it's being used here. So I was just wondering, is that what are they?
So the show, like with many things, has changed the way Palantiri work. But generally speaking, they talk to each other, very much like magical video phones. So if you put your hand on it, you would then connect to another Palantir, and then you would be able to talk to and see whoever's on the other side. So it's just a means of great communication. It's said, though, that very powerful people can use the Palantir to look at things. So as in, like, get a bird's eye view of something. So I would be sitting in Orthanc with Saruman's Palantir. I'd put my hand on it and I would be able to see what's happening in Osgiliath. Or I would be able to go and have a look at the Shire or something like that. Very powerful people can use it as like a spying tool. But generally speaking, all they do is connect to each other and allow two people to have a long-distance conversation and that kind of thing. They do have very minor possible future vision aspects to them. So they might show you a vision of the future. But generally speaking, no, they just connect to each other, with the exception of two actually. One of the Palantirs, which rests in Elastirion, which is the Tower Hills near Linden, so at the end of this storyline that the show's based on, one of the Palantir only looks west, so it doesn't connect to any of the others in Middle-earth, and all it does is look back across the sea, so they can then see back west, which has very little purpose. And then there's also one of the Palantirs is in Valinor, and that's where it stays, and that one doesn't connect to the Middle-earth ones either. But the other 6... which go to Middle-earth. So 7 of them go to Middle-earth after the end of this story, which then, small side note, Talmiriel mentions that all of them have been lost except this one. It's like, well, no, they haven't. And the films even tell us that they haven't been lost. So Amazon is now also retconning the film's own storyline, which is a bit interesting. But anyway, 7 of them go to Middle-earth, 6 of them all talk to each other, and 1 of them doesn't. And that's what they do. They are just communication tools at their core, but super powerful people like Sauron or Saruman, or Aragorn even to an extent. They can use the Palantir more to see something, to use it as a spying tool, or possibly get a vision of the future.
So, going off on a slight tangent, in the films, when Gandalf gets annoyed that the hobbits are looking at the Palantir and he throws the thing over the top of it to stop it being seen, is that because then at that time they then know that Sauron is using them to spy on the rest of the world, and that's why they keep them all covered?
Yeah, so when Pippin looks into the Palantir, he sees Sauron, and similarly Sauron sees him, and that gives away something of their plan, because they think Sauron might put 2 and 2 together and wonder why a hobbit is anywhere near a Palantir. And so he might think, bugger, they've given the ring to a hobbit or something like that. That's why they're so terrified. But fortunately, and also because the Palantir and Sauron's power, he could use the Palantir to look into a person. So he might have found out about Frodo from Pippin's own thoughts. So that's why it's just great concern, yeah.
And that's why he takes Pippin away, because he's been seen by
Sauron. Yeah, so he takes Pippin somewhere where if Sauron tries to get him, he's as defensible as possible, which is Minas Tirith.
So sad. My next question was about the orcs. So we see more of the orcs in this one, which was good. I liked that bit. The orcs can't stand sunlight, and obviously in one of the episodes they kind of get a bit burnt, or they look like they're like singeing from the sun. Why can't orcs go in the sun?
So the orcs don't get harmed by sunlight. They're not like vampires. And the word that I've seen lots of Tolkien fans use when talking about orcs and sunlight is the psychological effect of the sunlight. So in a very, very basic, broad term, the orcs are sort of underpowered if they go into the sunlight. They fear it as a thing, as a concept, but it doesn't physically harm them. But there's a number of times that Tolkien really stresses orcs do not like the sunlight, but if they have to go into it, they will do, but they need to have a really strong reason. So in the First Age, they fight a couple of battles in sunlight, and that's because of their driving hatred, and also because of fear of what's driving them, i.e. Melkor or Balrogs or things like that. But in this instance, like where we see them hold up at the forest line, that's because nothing's pushing them. Their hatred of Arondir and the people isn't strong enough. They don't have a real need to go into the sunlight. And without that purpose, they are afraid of it. In the same way, like if you don't like heights, but your child is trapped on top of a telephone pole, you'd go to get them because your child is on a pole. There's a reason to climb that thing. So you just suck up your fear and you do it. But if your child isn't stuck on the pole, you're not going to climb it because you're terrified of heights. So that's kind of the best way to think of it.
It could also be a little bit like because they're always under a shadow of darkness, they don't have any like natural protection to it. So maybe they do burn very easily, like how, you know, how when you get a tan, you kind of have a little bit more resistance, and they never have that. So maybe they would burn a little bit easier than anyone else. You don't know. I bet they don't have sun cream in Middle-earth.
There's a market for orc sun cream, apparently, and that someone is missing a trick.
Yeah. My last question, because I think on some of the others, other people have asked, and I think it was then answered in the actual show, so I didn't ask the questions. My last one was around the mithril. My question with that one was that Elrond is looking at it very intently, almost like he's seeing something in it or is knowing something about it. Is there something special about it, or is he aware of anything special, or is it literally just because it's a new thing that's never been found, do we think?
It's just because it's a new thing that's not been found. So mithril is just a super powerful ore. It's not magical, it's not mystical, it's just a powerful ore. Like it's iron plus or steel plus, although steel is I can't remember the name because I don't know the ores, but steel you don't mine out of the ground, do you? It's made the combination of iron and another item. But anyway, yeah, it's just a really useful ore. Elrond holding it is just so the show can make you, the viewer, know this is a really important thing. If Elrond's this transfixed by it, it's useful. And interestingly, actually, in the appendices, it does specifically mention that the elves move to Eregion because of the discovery of mithril. So possibly a bit spoilerish, I think Celebrimbor is going to know about the mithril, and that is actually going to be the reason why they came. And Elrond's then going to be like, whoa, what? Hold up. Now I'm caught between my people and my friendship with Durin. But that's spoilery speculation. But no, mithril is not magical. It's just very strong. It's a really useful ore. It will therefore be very valuable. And at the moment, and indeed forevermore, it's only found in Khazad-dûm. Which is why they want to guard it so secretly. But we're already getting, and again, we're touching on spoiler speculation, but we're already getting that split where some of the dwarves are going to be saying, no, it's too dangerous to get that mithril, and other dwarves are going to be saying, balls to it, get the mithril, which is exactly what happens. Although it isn't. All of the dwarves are of one mind that they should mine the mithril, because they have no idea a Balrog lives under the mountain. But we're already getting that aspect of one party doesn't want to go deep, one party does, and then one's going to be vindicated when the Balrog slays half their people.
I thought it was... no, that's speculation. I'll come back to my speculation in the speculation section. That's it for that. And then we will move on to questions from others. Now, the questions that we're going to answer today, some of them will be from questions that would have been answered in the last episode in relation to 1 and 2. But obviously we did episode 3 immediately after 1 and 2. So it will be like a bigger chunk of questions today, but there probably wouldn't be as many moving forward, I would imagine.
So what is the first question from you, the viewer?
So our first question is from someone called Boreas Simius, I believe. I'm sorry if that's not how you want me to say it, but that's how I've done it. And he says, what is it about Mordor that makes Sauron choose it as his base of operations?
Yeah, that's very easily answered. I mean, just look at a map of Mordor.
I mean,
it's super defensible. So there's only one way in, which is the mouth, or the Eisenmouth it's called, sorry, which is the gap. And other than that, there's a map on the walls, Jess is probably going to tell you. Other than that, on the eastern side of Mordor, by the time Sauron comes to Mordor, all the people that live on the east are firmly rooted in Camp Sauron. They are Team Sauron. So he has no natural enemies, and everyone's got to come through a tiny gap in the mountains. It's the ultimate defensive location.
This isn't a question, or is a question. With orcs, are they born, or are they're created?
That's way too much to talk about for this video. You could do a whole video on the creation of orcs. There's way too much about
Okay. In the time of the Fellowship of the the Fellowship of the Ring, etc., are the people are there people in Mordor, or no? It's just all orcs and
No, there's loads of people in Mordor. Slaves mostly, but also some people willingly, but mostly slaves. But no, the whole southern area called Nirn, which you can see there, that is the breadbasket of the evil nations, and it's a very fertile place, and it is worked almost exclusively by slaves. So there's loads of humans in Mordor, yeah.
Okay. Question number 2. How would you say that?
Kair.
There you go. Kair. I've said that wrong too. Are there forgotten Avari elves potentially hidden throughout the east of Middle-earth, or of those who never made it to Valinor?
Yes, so all of our elves are in essence forgotten. Tolkien never, ever writes about them again. He mentions them at the very beginning in the Silmarillion. He mentions that some elves don't go on the journey, the great journey from where they awake to Valinor. And those elves are called the Avari, dark elves. They are never mentioned again. And where they are born is far east of any map of Middle-earth you've ever seen. So they are just totally not in the story, which leaves an opening for anyone to then write them into the story, which we did in Divide and Conquer, or I did in Divide and Conquer. And the show could have done with Arondir and those elves that live in the east, but they didn't. But no, from the lore standpoint, the Avari are just never in the story again. They are totally forgotten. They could be anywhere. They could be living anywhere in the east of Middle-earth, and we just don't know.
Okay. Next question is from Deathshade. If Galadriel is forbidden to return to Valinor due to being part of Feanor's company... I said that wrong.
Carry on.
Did she get a special dispensation to return at the end of the Return of the King?
Yes, so as again some people have pointed out, the ban is actually lifted from Galadriel at the end of the First Age, because she participated in the War of Wrath and she in essence repented the deeds of Feanor and his company. She is allowed to go back to Valinor. She chooses not to, so the ban is then reinstated upon her, but then at the end of Return of the King, she then passes the test, as Peter Jackson has her do, and she returns to Valinor finally. Having confronted all that she wanted to do in Middle-earth, she finally goes back. So yes, at the end of the Return of the King, she is allowed back, and she does go back.
Why is she banned?
She's banned because Feanor slew some elves. This is a real Explain Like I'm 5 description, but Feanor slew some elves to do what he wanted. He put his own wishes above the lives of other elves. And Galadriel, while she didn't participate in the slaying, she did then support him and followed him to Middle-earth. And for that reason, her and all of her kin, the Noldor, they were banned together. But only those that participated. So her father, for example, is still in Valinor, ruling over the Noldor. But the Noldor that went with Feanor or associated with him, they were all banned. And it's because he slew some elves. Is a very simple description.
And is Feanor just a special elf, like a high-ranking elf, or was he?
Yeah, so high-ranking. Yeah, he's the son of the High King of the Noldor. But Feanor again is a super complicated character, and there's loads to talk about with him. But he won't come into the show, so I don't think we need to discuss it.
Okay.
I mean, I could do, but it's just way too much information for the show. He'll never feature again. They mentioned him as Hammer in episode 1, but he'll never come up again. So it's just not worth it.
Okay. The next question is from Natlev Show. That is right. Yeah. In the films, the orcs are seen in different colours in the films. Is there distinct reasons to why they're different in the show, or are they like the early version of them?
No, so there's no lore reason behind the visuals of the orcs. They just look like whoever the creator of each individual show wants them to look. Orcs, if they were to be true to lore, they would look a lot more human or elven-like than they do, and they would just have like a kind of a tainted skin, but they wouldn't look like the beasts that they look like. They would look far more human. But I can understand why they don't do that. You want your creatures to be like mythical, don't you? You want them to look a bit interesting. So having them just look like pale-skinned elves would be a bit... People wouldn't like understand that. You need a visual distinction for your enemies, and I can understand why every depiction of orcs ever always makes them into these like beastie creatures. But They shouldn't be, really. But in this case, answering the question, the difference between Peter Jackson and the Amazon show is just however they wanted to make the orcs look. And Amazon wants them to look a bit different so that they stamp their own name on them.
Because they're dark-skinned in the films, aren't they?
Yeah, they are more pale in Amazon's show, actually.
They're they're more like the colour of that book right there. What is that? The Fall of
Super useful
Gondolin.
Visual for you all. That book right there that you can't see, they're
you.
like that colour. Well, their camera's not good enough to pick it up, really.
It's that colour. That's not bad. They're like that colour.
Yeah, they are.
There you go. This is, for anyone who wants to know, the Fall of Gondolin. The next one is a question from Noobster. Now, I'm not going to read out the entire question, but the main crux of the question is how many elves were there or are there on Middle-earth?
So I'm afraid to disappoint you, Noobster. We really just don't know. Tolkien is never clear with figures at any stage. Some people try to guess how many participants there are in like battles and things like that. But in terms of the whole population, we have no idea. The only thing we really know about elves and reproduction and their numbers are that elves, generally speaking, they marry when they're young for elves. They tend to have 1 or 2 children, usually tops. There are obviously a lot of examples of them having 4 or 5, but normally they only have 1 or 2, and then they never have children again. So elves are really slow to reproduce, whereas humans obviously reproduce like humans. And that's why there's so many more of them. But in terms of total numbers, we just do not know how many elves there are. We don't know how many, and even when Tolkien might suggest a number, he then changes it later on anyway. So there's no definitive answer of how many elves there are, and I'm not even going to try and guess. Someone who has delved ridiculously into the lore, like the Tolkien professor Corey Olsen, he might be able to give you a real numbers guess, but even then it will just be a guess. And I'm not going to guess. So we just don't know, really.
The next one is from someone called TD. And this was a question about episode 3. Do we know if Ar-Pharazôn was a Chancellor first, like it is shown there? Should we do that one first?
No, read them both.
And as we see a map in episode 3 from the place where later Mordor is, do we know then when Mordor is shaped and was risen by Sauron, or was it there forever since the creation of the world after the fall of the lamps?
So in relation to Ar-Pharazôn, he is a powerful and noble, noble's probably the wrong word. He is a high-ranking member of Númenorian society. I don't think he's ever expressly called a Chancellor. I think Amazon's just added that to make him connected to the Queen better. But he would have been connected with the royal family indeed. But I don't know if he was specifically ever called a Chancellor. I think that's an Amazon creation. As for Mordor, Mordor has been like it is for thousands of years. Sauron has no hand in the creation of Mordor. It was raised in the way it was in the discord between Melkor and the other Valar when the world was still being shaped. So Sauron didn't create Mordor in that way. He didn't raise the mountains to be suitable for his purposes. It was that way already, and he then took it up because of how useful it is.
The next one is from the Dank Lord. Did Tolkien write about guilds in Númenor, such as was shown in the show, or is it just a show thing? You thought it was kind of neat.
No, so Tolkien is always very light on the everyday lives of everyone he ever talks about. He's a much more big picture kind of guy. So no, we have no idea if the guilds are real. The guilds are natural. Guilds are a human thing. Obviously, we've had guilds for hundreds of years. So there almost certainly would be something like that, but he doesn't specifically write about it. We don't get detailed information on how the Númenorians live their lives, unfortunately.
So the thing with them being... having to be like a member of a guild to be like anything special and have access to XYZ, that's just kind of
that's all Amazon.
Amazon. It's quite fun though. So the next question is from the Humanity. Again, I'm not going to read out the whole question, but in a nutshell, why did the elves forget about Sauron? Is it because they choose to forget about his existence, or are they too proud to admit that it's something that happened in their past?
So this is one where the show, because of the timeline change, it's difficult. But after the War of Wrath, Sauron doesn't come back into the story really for 500 to 1,000 years. And he doesn't bother the elves at all. So it would be most elves, your average everyday elf would totally have forgotten about Sauron. He was defeated in the War of Wrath, and he was either taken back to Valinor or he's just disappeared off somewhere else. But he's not threatening them, so why would they care about him? But they haven't specifically forgotten about Sauron. He's just no longer a threat. There's not something they consider, not something they're bothered by. Now, they don't know where he is. They don't know if he's ever going to attack them again. He might have gone back to Valinor. So for all they know, Sauron's just not a problem. So it's not hubris that means we're going to ignore Sauron, and it's not that they've forgotten who he is. It's just that at the moment he's not doing anything, and they have no evidence of where or what he is doing. So how do you prepare for every eventuality? You don't. You just get on with your lives. And that's what the show's trying to show. So it's building up Galadriel as having this vendetta against him, whereas all the other elves are like, love, he hasn't been around for 500 years. Why should I care about your brother being killed by him? Like, we've all lost someone. So it's just that he's moved out of the public conscience. And 500 years is obviously a long time. But the Amazon show has dilly-dallied with the story, so it's difficult to pin down an answer to that question in relation to the show. But in the lore aspect, it's just that there's been a huge amount of peace, and they're not expecting Sauron to come back. They just had a almost world-ending war, so it's unlikely they would think he'd come back.
The next one is from This is Antoine. So he is asked about the wargs and whether they are clearly stylized to look as they do. Is that specific to the lore of Lord of the Rings, or is that...
So the visual of the warg in the show is again just Amazon's own take on it, and it is indeed a warg that we do see. One of the orcs even says release the wargs or something like that. But wargs as a species are a sort of elevated version of a wolf. So they are related to wolves. I believe they're related to us. I don't think they're Maiar. But anyway, they're a more intelligent version of a wolf. So much so that in The Hobbit they actually talk and they speak to each other. But every visual representation always has them as beasts. And Amazon's done the same thing. But yeah, they're just intelligent wolves, basically. They're more powerful, they're cleverer, and they can speak to each other. And they tend to always seem to side with the evil forces. But that is what they are. And the show's using wargs again, yeah.
And they are a specific species. They're not like something that's been like twisted and turned, like an orc from an elf, for example, or whatever hell.
Oh, well, that I don't know, actually.
Could that be...
They might have been created from the beginning and they've just got a capacity more to evil. Or they might be twisted wolves. I don't know. I don't think Tolkien ever talks about the creation of wargs. But yeah, everything in Middle-earth is either created bespoke, there's no evolution, which is talked about a lot, or it's corrupted to evil. So they were either created at the beginning or they were corrupted like wolves or something. But the fact that they are very intelligent, this is where The Hobbit and The Lord of the Rings cross over, because The Hobbit's a real children's book. And Tolkien writes a lot of things in The Hobbit that he then changes his mind on. And I think intelligent wargs is one of them. But if you take The Hobbit, then they were probably created and they just like evil. And if you take them in the rest of the saga, they're probably corrupted wolves or dogs. But that I don't know. Someone else might. Hopefully someone in the comments will. But I haven't read about the wargs all that much, really, because there's not much about them. They're a bit of an unknown. And
the elves, would they have seen wargs before?
Yeah, they're present in the First Age.
So when because it's not like a new thing, them being released on the slaves when they're...
No. They're just ferocious. They're just, when you don't have a weapon, you might be able to fight off a guy. You can disarm him. You might be able to get a punch in. But without a weapon, how do you fight a wolf with just your bare hands? It's very difficult, isn't it? And wargs are better wolves, so it just makes sense. It heightens the stakes.
I think that's our last question from the viewers. There were other questions that were asked in the comments, but a lot of them were then answered in episode 4, so we haven't bothered adding those as questions today, because obviously most people, I'd assume if you're watching this one, you've watched episode 4 potentially. So at this point we will then move on to speculation, So if you don't want any spoilers or anything like that, then stop watching now. And now we will speculate on a couple of matters.
Yeah. So the big one from this episode, of course, is we finally met Adar. Something I didn't mention in the last episodes, but you've probably all worked it out by now. But Adar is Sindarin for father. It literally means father. And there's lots of speculation about who he is. Originally, I feared he might be Sauron at the end of episode 3, because obviously of how obviously evil he is, and the lay viewer, the normal person watching along, will think Sauron will be whoever looks the most evil, because they know Sauron's super evil. So, and hopefully the show is going to pull the wool over everyone's eyes and make Sauron appear last minute, which is what I'd really like. So I don't think Adar is Sauron. I think that's pretty much set in stone.
Who do you think he could be?
I've seen people, well, Jess has mentioned, I haven't actually seen it myself, but Jess mentioned that someone thought he might be Maglor. Maglor is one of the sons of Feanor. He's the only one that survives. And interestingly, Maglor raises Elrond. So there's an interesting connection there if it is going to be Maglor. But Maglor gets one of the Silmarils and he throws it into the ocean, and then he wanders the coastline of Middle-earth forevermore. And so he could potentially come into the show. They'd have to retcon his story a bit, but he could come into the show. But the problem I see with the Maglor theory is that Maglor is not mentioned at all in The Return of the King or the appendices. His story ends in the Silmarillion, and they don't have the rights to that, so I don't think it'll be Maglor. Personally, I think Adar is going to be the first time on screen we're going to get to see that not all elves are good. And some of them were actually relatively bad people. Someone's likened Adar to an elf called Eol, who's the most obvious example of an evil elf because he kills his wife. He tries to kill his son and he accidentally kills his wife instead. And then he's thrown off of a wall. But so Eol is dead, so it can't be Eol unless they really retcon his story. But he was a genuinely bad elf. He was not a nice guy. And I think Adar's just going to be the first time we're going to get to see that not all elves are the shiny beacons of hope that everyone thinks they are. But it'd be cool if he's Maglor, personally. I think I would like that, but I don't think they have the rights to him. But if they did, it would be good, because then Elrond is confronted with the fact that he was raised by this evil guy. Although Maglor wasn't evil, he was just bound by his oath. But I think there's too many hoops to go through for it to be Maglor. So I think Adar is just going to be a generic evil elf.
They have Adlin did ask, didn't he? Who are you, and then what are you? In terms of, so it could be someone. I mean, I hope it's not Sauron.
Yeah, I don't think it'll be Sauron. It's too obvious, and that leads us on to the second point. Many people speculating, of course. Personally, I think Meteor Man is Sauron. I think that is going to be Sauron. They want us to think he's going to be a wizard. They're going through great pains to make him look like Gandalf, have magical powers. He's landed with the hobbits, so then you're thinking Gandalf hobbits together. And I really hope that they're then going to pull a complete 180 and be like, aha, that was Sauron all along. And the meteor was him just coming back from him having run away from the Valar at the end of the First Age. The meteor isn't real. That's an Amazon thing. But I feel really confident that is going to be Sauron. Personally, if I were a betting man, that's where I'd put my money.
The just touching on that, the human or the man that had the hilt in his barn, he says a lot about the fact that that's the coming of something. Yeah. When they stab it into their arm, what sword is that, firstly?
Well, I think it's meant to be reminiscent of the Morgul blades from Return of the King, or from the War of the Ring, the Lord of the Rings, which Frodo is stabbed with and turns him into the Shade. I think it's meant to be reminiscent of that, but fundamentally it's an Amazon creation. That there's nothing in the lore attested that there's a sword that needs blood to be a sword. But obviously, for the show's purposes, it's just showing you this is quite clearly an evil sword. And then the little discussion between that man and the boy at the very end of episode 4 is just highlighting again that the sword is evil. It's linked to Sauron, and that man obviously knows about Sauron from his past.
Okay.
But yeah, it's an Amazon creation, the sword. But then, speaking of the boy, some people have suggested that the boy might become a Nazgul, but then, as we've just said there, I think really that sword is just meant to show you that the sword is evil. I don't think the boy's going to become anything special. I think it's just going to lead into the story where inevitably these humans are going to join Sauron. And so I don't think Theo, I think that's his name, but I don't think he's going to become a Nazgul or anything like that. I think he's just going to be the personal aspect of those humans falling to Sauron. So rather than just the show being like these humans fell to Sauron, they're going to give you that in a more personal way by you following the story of one of those humans and how he fell. And I think that's all it's going to be. I think Theo's just going to turn out to be a servant of Sauron, and the sword's going to twist him to be as such.
I saw some speculation about Adolin being twisted and becoming the...
Jess and I are reading the Stormlight Archive at the moment.
Oh my god!
And we're both reading the... I'm on book 3 and Jess is on book 1. And one of the main characters in the Stormlight Archive is called Adolin Collin. And Jess has just referred to him in place of, I assume, Arondir.
I do mean Arondir. I do mean that. I've heard speculation that people thought that maybe Arondir could become the mouth of Sauron, being twisted to become the mouth of Sauron.
I don't think Arondir would be. The mouth of Sauron was always said to be a dark Númenórean. But again, they could do what they want with him. He's such a minor character that he could become the mouth of Sauron. But it would be an odd choice, personally. It would be there just to be a bit of fan service to the film again.
But also, wouldn't the mouth of Sauron want to be that? So, because I'm assuming...
You should sit closer.
Wouldn't the mouth of Sauron want to be the mouth of Sauron? Because rather than being forced into it, surely they would be willingly in that position, rather than someone who's been twisted and forced into it.
Yeah, so the mouth in the real story, the mouth is one of the Númenóreans that still follows Sauron. And he just willingly becomes his speaker. Yeah. Yeah. But then that, again, would be a Númenórean. But they could change it to be Arondir.
But the only reason I don't think that would happen is because Arondir doesn't like what's going on. So he's against evil. So it would have to be like a huge 180 for him to do that.
Yeah, that or he's forced to be. Like, again, Amazon might just totally change it up and do what they want. We don't know.
Yeah, true.
But I think Arondir will just end up dying or making it to safety, or he's probably going to sacrifice himself for the humans, I think. But I don't think he's going to become an evil servant. So then the last thing that we want to speculate on is linked...
Two things.
Oh, there's two things, sorry. Is last thing about humans is I've mentioned that I think Meteor Man is Sauron, and we've talked about how we don't think Theo is a Nazgul. Well, I've seen people suggest that Halbrand is going to be both of those things. So he's either going to be a Nazgul or he's going to be Sauron. I don't think he's going to be Sauron. I think they've already clearly established that he's the descendant of the Southmen's king, and I think that is what he's going to be. I don't think he's going to be a Nazgul because... the Nazgul, I don't think at the moment they're lending himself to be an evil follower. I think he's going to be of the evil people, but he's going to fight for the goodies, and that's why you're going to get behind him. He's going to be one of those types of people, the good one amongst the bad eggs. So I don't think he'll become a Nazgul. I don't think it matters, though. Nazgul were all said to be either kings or powerful sorcerers or powerful warriors. Some people misquote it and think that they were all kings, but they weren't. Some of them were kings, but some of them were just powerful people. And we know that for a fact because 3 of them are said to be Númenóreans, and none of the Númenórean kings turned into Nazgul. So straight away that tells you they're not all kings. So Halbrand potentially could become one, but I just don't think he is. Personally, my theory is that he's going to become the king of the dead. And he's going to build up a relationship with Isildur so that we get that connection between the two. He's then going to go back to Middle-earth with them. He's going to return to his people. And he's then going to say to Isildur, I will fight with you. And then he's not going to. And he's going to become the king of the dead. I think that all just lines up. Other than the fact that he doesn't live in the right set of mountains. With a small retcon on Amazon's part, I think that again gives them another link into the original story. So I think he's going to become the king of the dead, personally. But he's definitely not Sauron. It's just too... it doesn't work and again, this is where the spoiler aspect comes in, because the Numenorians capture Sauron, knowing full well that it is Sauron. They go to Middle-earth to defeat him. His army surrenders immediately because the Numenorians are so splendid and powerful, and Sauron willingly allows himself to be captured, and they know they've caught him. So having him already mixed around in the background as Halbrand, I don't think works as well. Because if he could just freely wander over to Numenor, he would have done it on his own time. So I don't think Halbrand is going to be Sauron, personally. But it could change.
And then I wondered, with the Mithril, Elrond is quite kind of enamoured by Disa's singing, and then he watches how the pebbles and all the rocks start like moving. I was wondering, do you think he might then suggest that kind of way of working is brought in to the creation of what Celebrimbor does?
Yeah, maybe. Yeah. I saw that scene, and maybe I'm jumping the gun way too much. Probably because I'm burdened with glorious purpose. No, I'm burdened with knowledge. I know that the Balrog's going to be the end story for the dwarves, and personally, I saw that rumbling as the first signs of that they're singing to the mountain is what's going to wake up the Balrog. But I hadn't thought of that, of him seeing in awe of how they did it. And yeah, maybe it will then lead itself to how the dwarves and elves work together. Because ultimately, the dwarves and the elves, the closest the dwarves and the elves ever come in true friendship is Eregion and Khazad-dûm. Because they both share a love of creation. Because the elves that break away and move to Eregion under Celebrimbor, they are the ones that are closest in teachings to Feanor, and ultimately the Valar called Aule, who is the creator of the dwarves. And I mean the literal creator. He actually sculpted them and made them. Eru Ilúvatar breathed life into them, but Aule is the creator god of the dwarves. But he also taught Feanor. Like, he just taught him how to do things. So there's a section of the Noldor that really, revere smithing. And then the dwarves are created by the god of smithing. So they have that connection. They just love creating stuff. So they get on really well. And so the Elrond seeing that, that could then lead itself into how they come together, the two nation states, as it were. But
in the lore, they don't have any I can't remember what she called it now. That way of singing to the mountain doesn't come into play for the actual creation of the rings and stuff like that.
No. The rings are just forged in the normal way and then empowered with Sauron's knowledge.
So he has to get there.
Yeah, Sauron, Celebrimbor creates the rings, but under the guidance of Sauron. That's how he's then able to make the One Ring to control them.
So at the moment, Celebrimbor's not planning on making the rings right now. He's just wanting to make this big new forge and make it amazing to make something. Or Sauron's already given that little whisper in his ear, and then he's doing that, and then Sauron will come back and be like, now, I think you should make X, Y, Z.
Well, that we just don't know. I think either Celebrimbor has already been talking to Sauron, and that's going to be a big reveal at the end of the season, that the whole time he's been working with this other elf, and this other elf's going to step up, and it's going to be Anatar, and everyone that knows that Sauron's going to be like, oh my god, it's Sauron, and everyone else will be like, who is this elf? So either that's one possibility, or the second one, which I think is more likely at the moment, is Celebrimbor has caught wind of the Mithril and has moved there so that he can use it.
How would he catch wind of that, though?
Well, I don't know, but those are the two realistic options. The tower that he's building, he doesn't build a tower. He builds a grand forge, but I suppose it could be a tower. That's quibbling over nothing. But the tower that he builds is just a great forge, just a really powerful forge, and then he happens to use that to make the rings. But yeah, I think either he's already in discussion with Sauron, and that's his ultimate purpose, or he's already caught wind of the Mithril and he wants to use it and he's setting up a forge ready to deal with it. Personally. But, I mean, I just don't know. He might just be on a jolly and he likes building forges.
Wants his legacy to live on.
Quite. He's the grandson of the most skilled forge in existence, bar the literal creator or the literal god of forging. So he has a big weight on his shoulders. He's got to live up to Feanor. And Fëanor created the Silmarils, which are wonders of creation, and they're never matched ever again. So even the rings don't come close, although they are a master work. So yeah, we'll just have to wait and see. But no, I'm not sure. I think it's going to be about the Mithril first, and then the Mithril is probably what's going to bring Sauron as well, and that's when we're going to meet Sauron.
I hope we get more of the. Is it resonating? They call it. Is that what they call it?
Oh yeah, I think so.
I hope we get more of that because that was a good. I liked that scene. That was good.
Yeah.
Anyway, I think that's all the things that we were going to speculate on.
Yeah, that's everything at the moment. If you, again, have questions or if you want to speculate on something, either comment them down below or, again, come and join us in the Discord. And there's a forum, as I say, at the top of the Discord called Rings of Power. You can post your threads in there and you can ask whatever you want and people will chat with you and then we'll be around as well. So do let us know. But if you don't want to join the Discord, just post it on YouTube and we will see it. And hopefully you've enjoyed this episode. Do let us know as well if there's anything you would like done differently. But otherwise, store up your questions and post them away so that we can answer them next week. And until we speak again, dear friends, Navair Neden Perimad Melonin, and farewell.